Biomed Nexus. Daily updates, your essential biotech, medtech, and pharma recap. No noise, just what matters. TLDR, President Trump announced plans for steep tariffs on imported generic drugs beginning in 2028, and Indian pharmaceutical stocks fell sharply on the news. It is a far blunter instrument than the onshoring appeals we covered 2 weeks ago. Pharma is lobbying hard to narrow the proposed China restrictions, moving the fight from last week's deadline to the legislation itself, exactly where we said it would go. Samsung Biologics is buying polypeptide for $1, 8B to expand obesity drug manufacturing, and Repligen is buying BioLife for $1. 5B for a cell therapy product pharma depends on. 2 picks and shovels deals in 1 day. Gilead and Merck reported detailed Phase 3 data for a once-weekly oral HIV regimen that held viral suppression in patients switching off daily therapy. Celldex's barzolvolimab missed in a Phase 2 skin trial, sending shares lower ahead of bigger Phase 3 data this fall. Executive takeaway. 2 weeks ago, we covered the White House pressing pharma executives to bring generic manufacturing home, and our read was blunt. Expect supportive statements and very slow actual movement because the economics of generics do not bend to urging. You cannot ask companies to move production of drugs that earn pennies a pill without either subsidies or higher prices. Yesterday, the administration answered with the other lever. Trump announced plans for steep tariffs on imported generic drugs starting in 2028, and Indian pharmaceutical stocks fell sharply in response. That timeline matters. 2 years is long enough to be a genuine planning horizon rather than a shock, which suggests the intent is to force relocation decisions rather than to punish immediately. Here is the tension nobody has resolved. India supplies a large share of the generic medicines Americans take, and it does so cheaply. We covered the consequences of that dependency in June when soaring platinum prices and thin margins pushed Indian manufacturers of cisplatin and carboplatin, 2 of the most essential chemotherapy drugs in the world, toward a supply crisis. Tariffs address the strategic vulnerability of concentrated foreign production. They do not fix the underlying economics that made production concentrate there in the first place. If tariffs raise the cost of imported generics without making domestic production viable, the risk is not reshoring, it is shortages and higher prices. The 2028 start date gives the industry time to work that out, and it gives Washington time to pair the stick with something resembling a carrot. Watch whether subsidies or procurement guarantees follow, because tariffs alone will not build a domestic generics industry. And note where the China fight went. Stat reported pharma is now working to tamp down the broad China restrictions under consideration. The deadline passed quietly last Friday, just as we said it would, and the action moved to the legislation just as we said it would. That is the fight that matters, and the industry is now spending its lobbying capital there. Read full analysis. Policy Trump reached for tariffs after urging did not work. President Trump announced plans to impose steep tariffs on imported generic drugs beginning in 2028, and Indian pharmaceutical stocks fell sharply on July 22nd in response, according to the pharma letter. It marks an escalation from the approach we covered on July 9th, when Secretary of State Marco Rubio, HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and HHS Chief Counsel Chris Klomp pressed pharma leaders in a private meeting to reshore essential medicine production. India supplies a large share of America's generic medicines, and the sector's razor-thin margins are precisely why that production sits overseas. The 2028 timeline gives companies a real planning window rather than an immediate shock, which suggests the goal is to force relocation decisions. The open question is whether tariffs alone can change the math, or whether they simply raise costs on drugs that are already priced near the floor. This lands 8 days before the Section 232 pharma tariffs take effect for large companies on July 31st. China, the fight moved from the deadline to the legislation, and pharma is lobbying hard. Stat reported that pharma is working to tamp down the broad China restrictions under consideration in Washington. This is the natural next phase of the story we tracked through July. Last Friday's deadline for Merck, AbbVie, Lilly, Pfizer and BMS to answer the House Select Committee passed without a public reveal, and we said at the time that the letters were theatre and the Biotech Investment National Security Act was the weapon that mattered. That bill would route China licensing deals through Treasury review and still awaits a committee vote. Industry is now spending its influence trying to narrow the scope before it moves. Expect the argument to center on the distinction between national security risk and ordinary commercial licensing, and on the collateral damage to smaller biotechs that cannot absorb the compliance burden. This is where the outcome gets decided, and it will play out over months. Manufacturing and tools, 2 picks and shovels deals landed the same day, and both follow the money. Samsung Biologics agreed to buy polypeptide for $1. 8B to expand into obesity drug manufacturing, according to Biospace. Polypeptide makes peptides including GLP-1 medicines, and Samsung identified the deal as a way to tap the surging demand for obesity drug production capacity. It is a clean read on where manufacturing demand is heading. The GLP-1 boom needs peptide capacity, and the CDMOs that have it can charge for it. Separately, Repligen struck a $1, 5B deal for BioLife to add a cell therapy product that pharma companies rely on. Both deals extend the consolidation in life sciences tools and manufacturing that we flagged with Merck KGaA's $11, 3B purchase of Bio-Techne in June. The logic is consistent across all three. Drug programs come and go, but the companies supplying the reagents, peptides, and manufacturing capacity get paid regardless of which molecules win. Infectious disease, a once-weekly HIV pill held up in Phase 3. Gilead, Gilead, and Merck reported detailed Phase 3 data showing their investigational once-weekly oral HIV regimen maintained viral suppression in adults who switched from daily antiretroviral therapy, according to the pharma letter. Moving from daily to weekly dosing is a meaningful quality of life change in a disease that requires lifelong treatment, and adherence is one of the persistent challenges in HIV care. The data matter commercially too, since the switch population is where the competition in HIV happens, with patients stable on existing regimens deciding whether a new option is worth changing for. A weekly pill that holds suppression is a strong argument. Quick hits. Celldex's barzolvolimab missed in a Phase 2 study in prurigo nodularis, an intensely itchy chronic skin condition, sending shares down pre-market. The company continues testing it elsewhere, with Phase 3 chronic hives data due in September or October. Summit released updated survival data from its Phase 3 Harmony trial of ivonescimab in lung cancer, the China-originated drug we covered when it made ASCO's plenary. The FDA decision is set for November 14th. AstraZeneca's Wainua failure is narrowing its path to an $80 billion revenue goal ahead of more high-risk readouts per Biospace, adding weight to the ATTR miss we led with Monday. A congressional advisory panel called America's Eroding Lead in Rare Disease, a National Security Issue, recommending a finalized FDA platform designation and more flexibility on trial designs for small populations. Coming up this week and next, Q2 earnings continue for Big Pharma. Late July, BMS KarXT Alzheimer's psychosis readout, PTC sepiapterin PKU readout. July 31st, Section 232 pharma tariffs effective for large companies. August 2026, Replimune RP1 FDA response. November 14th, Summit ivonescimab FDA decision. Read Full Analysis Biomed Nexus. Pro-Institutional Intelligence Brief. Why Tariffs Alone Will Not Reshore. Generics. The generic drug supply problem is real, and tariffs address only half of it. Understanding the other half is the difference between a policy that works and one that causes shortages. Here is the economics. Generic medicines compete almost purely on price. Many essential generics sell for pennies per dose, and manufacturers operate on margins thin enough that a modest cost increase makes production unprofitable. That is why production concentrated in India and China in the first place, and it is why we saw the cisplatin and carboplatin crisis in India in June, when rising platinum prices and import duties made two cornerstone chemotherapy drugs financially unviable to produce. A tariff raises the cost of imported generics. What it does not do is make domestic production profitable. If a US manufacturer still cannot produce a drug at a price the market will bear, a tariff on the import does not change that calculus. It just makes the imported version more expensive, which either raises prices for payers and patients or causes suppliers to exit the market entirely. Exit is how shortages happen. For tariffs to actually drive reshoring, three things need to accompany them: production subsidies or tax credits that close the cost gap for domestic manufacturers, procurement guarantees, likely through government purchasing, that give manufacturers predictable volume worth investing against, and a serious look at the pricing floor for essential generics, because a market that pays pennies will keep producing shortages regardless of where the plants sit. The 2028 start date is the encouraging part. 2 years is enough time to build the accompanying framework, and the delay suggests the administration understands this cannot be done overnight. Watch for what gets paired with the tariff between now and then. If subsidies and procurement commitments follow, this could genuinely shift manufacturing. If the tariff arrives alone, the likely outcomes are higher generic prices and more shortages of exactly the essential medicines this policy is meant to secure. The picks and shovels consolidation: Samsung Biologics buying polypeptide for $1, 8B and Repligen buying BioLife for $1, 5B on the same day is not coincidence. It is the visible surface of a consolidation wave running through life sciences tools and manufacturing, and the logic is worth spelling out. The thesis is simple: drug programs are binary and risky. Most fail. But every program, successful or not, consumes reagents, materials, and manufacturing capacity along the way. The companies supplying those inputs collect revenue from winners and losers alike. In a period where drug developers are flush with capital and running more programs than ever, the suppliers are in an exceptionally strong position. The specific bets are also telling. Samsung is buying peptide manufacturing capacity, which is a direct play on the GLP-1 boom. Obesity drugs are peptides, demand is enormous, and manufacturing capacity has been a genuine bottleneck. Repligen is buying into cell therapy inputs, a bet that the cell therapy field, despite its commercial struggles, keeps consuming specialized materials. And Merck KGaA's $11, 3B Biotechne acquisition in June was a bet on research reagents, the foundational inputs to discovery itself. What consolidates next? The most fragmented remaining segments are specialty reagents, single-use bioprocessing components, and analytical services. Any company with a differentiated product that developers cannot easily substitute is a target, particularly if it serves a modality that is scaling, which today means peptides, ADCs, and increasingly radiopharmaceuticals. If you run a mid-sized tools or specialty manufacturing business right now, strategic interest in you is as high as it has been in years, and the multiples reflect it. Coming catalysts. Q2 earnings continue this week and next. Late July brings the KarXT and Sepiapterin readouts. Section 232 tariffs hit July 31st. The full catalyst calendar returns Friday. Trump reached for tariffs after urging did not move generic manufacturing. Pharma took the China fight to the legislation, right where we said it would go. And two tools deals in one day show where the safe money is. What are you watching? Reply to this email. Visit the Pro Hub Read. Full article sponsorship slots for 2026 are limited. See packages and pricing. New Biomed Nexus signals weekly sales intelligence for life sciences BD teams. Learn more